Hi folks, welcome to Crisco's Corner. Unfiltered commentary. And that's your truth, the real truth. Please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thank you for your support. Hi folks, welcome back. As part of my series, what I call Searching for Freedom in America, before I get into the heavy stuff, I thought I'd show you guys some of the places that I've seen on my trip. I started off from upstate New York through West Virginia, through Kentucky, stayed in Tennessee for almost a week, went east through Tennessee into Western Virginia, and I was going to Virginia Beach to see family. And I decided to go north, take an extra day, and check out Chancellorsville. So here we are at Chancellorsville Battlefield. And it's a pretty cool place. It's where Andrew Jackson was wounded, eventually died. So it's a pretty cool place. Let's get some of the video that I had from there. There's myself going through the initial woods there that's around Chancellorsville. We'll just keep going there. Went all around most of the battlefield, came back around to the visitor center. It's heavily wooded, and it was heavily wooded back then as well. It's any of you that want to look it up online, it's a very, very interesting and incredibly brilliant victory by Lee, who was totally outnumbered and decided to split his army again and go all the way around the Union lines to basically outflank the Union Army, and they succeeded brilliantly. And as the Union was running and they were just being flanked and they were just being slaughtered, they started late in the day, and Stonewall Jackson was out through the woods looking for a spot to continue because they wanted to cut them off from Washington. They wanted to nab most of the Union Army. They had them a chance where they could surround them or drive them back and cut them off from Washington, as Jackson said, cut them off from the United States because they thought they were a different country. And there's just some of the posters there and some of the things you look at in Chancellorsville. It was a brilliant, brilliant victory by Lee. And it's still talked about in military schools and books today, the brilliance of it. The reason why Lee took so many chances is because he had to. He was totally outnumbered throughout the entire war. The supplies, the uniforms, shoes, ammunition, weapons. He was always, always, always undergunned, undermanned. So he had to take chances in order to pull off victories. And so here's a little bit. If you want to stop any of this and read what's on there, and there's a little map of what it was like. If you notice there, you can see the separate lines from the north, and the blue, of course, the darker color, you can't see it too well, is the Union troops. And what happened is, and right where that arrow is where the visitor center is, right in the center of the battle, they went south and west and went all the way around the Union right. As you can see, they come up behind them. It was an amazing, absolutely amazing tactical victory. And so we're going to see a little bit there. Sorry about the camera angle, and then as you see here, on May 2nd, 1863, Jackson's two leading lines battling the entangled undergrowth, and the retreating Federal 11th Corps became disorganized. In this vicinity, Jackson halted his successful advance and ordered A.P. Hill's division to the front. He should have kept them going. He should have pushed them harder, but while the change was being made, Jackson rode out with his staff about 9 p.m. to reconnoiter the Federal position. Meeting A.P. Hill, he gave one of his last field commands: press them, cut them off in the United States. Fort Hill pressed them. A few minutes later, he fell mortally wounded by the mistaken fire of his own men. Of course, they call that today friendly fire. They wanted to cut him off in the United States and capture several thousand. And these victories, at least psychologically and for the public, wanted them to wear them down. Now, look at the date here. This is May 1863. And as we all know, at the beginning of July 1863 was Gettysburg. So that's just 2 months. And Jackson was wounded, and I'll show you the spot here in a minute. They actually have a monument in the spot that shows exactly where he got shot. And Jackson was Lee's best general by far. Nothing wrong with Longstreet or the rest of them, but he was the man. Push, push, push. And there's just a little article there if you want to stop it and read it concerning the memorializing of Jackson's death. He was loved in the South. It was a tremendous blow to them psychologically, emotionally. It was a big deal. It was a very big deal. It was a blow. The morale of the South really took a huge blow. I do not know how to replace him. That's right. He was irreplaceable. Now let's stop here. This is right next to the monument of the spot where Jackson was shot. I put a penny on there, and I knelt and said a prayer. This is an unknown Union soldier. And I think it's fitting to say a prayer when I was there because people forget something. The Confederates were Americans too. And it was a horrible, horrible time for the country. It was a tremendous error in judgment and blunder on the South's part. Even though, they were all racist and they were all slaveholders and blah, 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 blah. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Jackson was not a slaveholder. Not by any means at all. In fact, he disliked slavery, and so did most of the Confederate soldiers. It's insane to think that. It really is. And it's no more like if you had black soldiers in World War II, and they were fighting for Jim Crow. Of course they weren't fighting for Jim Crow. That's stupidity. No, they were fighting for the United States. And the Confederates saw the Confederate States of America as their country because back then, your state was your country. Lee was heartbroken when his state seceded. He thought it was a terrible blunder. But his loyalty was to Virginia, just like Stonewall Jackson's was. Like he taught at VMI at the start of the war. Where I've been by, it's by Lynchburg. It's a pretty cool place. Right by the chapel where Washington Lee College is, where Lee is buried. I was there about a year and a half ago, and I think I showed some films on an earlier episode. So I think it was fitting to have this marker here to honor the unknown Union soldier. So I put a penny on his grave, and I knelt and said a prayer. He was just for his country. Now, this is a statue. You'll see a bigger picture when I show the whole monument, but this is supposedly some of the last words he said. Let us pass over the river and rest under the shade of the trees. And then he died. Now, understanding, I think he lost an arm, and he was really recovering, and he developed pneumonia. And, of course, back then there's no antibiotics. And as the pneumonia worsened, of course, he got worse and worse, and basically he died of the pneumonia, not the wound. And so this is the monument that stands on the spot where where Jackson was mortally wounded. And it was a terrible loss for them, terrible loss. And I'm going around the monument here, and you see it's Jackson. It's not his gravestone. On this spot fell mortally wounded Thomas J. Jackson, Lieutenant General CSA, on May 2nd, 1863, just 2 months before Gettysburg. And it was at night. You know, this happens in war. You're a heavily wooded area, and everybody's on edge. I mean, war's tough. and you see somebody coming down the road, and some Confederates fired through the trees and hit some of the men and hit Jackson in the arm. There was Jackson standing like a stone wall. That was what he was given at Manassas, first Manassas. And there's what Lee said concerning General Jackson. Very eccentric. Some would consider him a little wacky, but he was a brilliant tactician, and he was also incredibly religious. Now, I'm stopping the video here. This is the full monument. Now, don't take this the wrong way, some of you leftists, but this is U.S. history. And no, Jackson wasn't a traitor. In fact, after the war, of course, he was dead, Lee encouraged everyone to sign the oath again, and they were Americans again. The war was over. And that was the ironic part of Lincoln's assassination, was that Andrew Johnson, who was from Tennessee, but he was a Unionist, became president. He was very tough on the South. Abraham Lincoln wanted to let him off light. They were our countrymen. And he always said that. In fact, Lee never called the Union Army our enemy. He always said those people. It's hard to describe emotionally, psychologically. Civil wars are like family feuds. They're the ugliest, dirtiest fights. And it causes huge damage. And before I get too distracted here on that, I just wanted to say, I'm showing this because it's part of history. And General Jackson was shot. Now, my personal opinion, Jackson being shot here and died 8 days later, I believe it was the turning point of the war. And I'll tell you what I mean. Because the invasion of the North, it was about time. Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president, and Lee and some of his staff said, we've had this war in our territory this whole time, and it's horrible. What's that Lee quote? It's good that war is so terrible because maybe we'll grow too fond of it. So they wanted to bring the war of the North with papers from Jefferson Davis vying for peace. And that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to get between the Union Army and Washington, park themselves on high ground, send a dispatch under truce to Washington to hand deliver a letter to Lincoln from Jefferson Davis asking for peace. And the Confederates screwed up on the first day. If Jackson was there, knowing his tactical skill and his brilliance in battle and military things, he would have taken the high ground at day one of Gettysburg. And the Union probably would have lost that battle. At least they would have been cut off from Washington. And that letter would have been delivered, and history would have been much different. So this spot right here, what happened right here, changed the entire course of U.S. history. As we all know, from World War I, World War II, and onward, this spot changed world history. World history. And I don't want to hear, well, they were slaveholders, they were this, they were that. Absolute nonsense. Nonsense. Jackson hated slavery, and so did most of the Confederates. It had nothing to do with slavery. Now, later it became an issue about slavery that Lincoln couldn't really tell the people, we're killing tens of thousands at a time of our own people. I mean, the casualty lists were so long, it was horrific. It has to be something higher. It has to be something better. At these tens of thousands, ended up being 600,000 Americans in the end, died in the war. And that higher goal was the ending of slavery, finally, in the United States. That these hundreds of thousands of men that died did not die in vain. In that particular spot, in May 2nd of 1863, that bullet wounding Jackson changed world history. When I say world, I mean everywhere in the world. history would have been very, very, very different if Jackson was at Gettysburg. So I just wanted to get that in, why I think this spot in Jackson is so important. Now, I turned the sound down because there was so many cars going by that it was just causing too much noise. But these little small things that happen, like friendly fire on a general, well, it's just a general. 2 months later, Gettysburg would have been much different. And we can only speculate on how different. But I believe the world would have been incredibly different. So we look at this and don't think of a traitor and a monster. These were just men that were being loyal to their state. It had nothing to do with slavery in their minds, but the overall goal in the end was the elimination of slavery. Lincoln was right. And he brought up slavery because that kind of carnage, that kind of heavy price, had to be for something more than just the Union. And he was right. The ending of slavery was that cause. Now, it shows here on the map the Confederates going all around the Union right, coming up through the woods, and they were trying to outflank them, even though they were outnumbered. The Union Army was much, much bigger. And they come around behind the Federals and caught them completely off guard, just outflanked them. And they were on the run. And Jackson was really pressing hard, pressing hard, pressing hard. They started later in the day. It took a long time to get all the way around, undetected, I might add. And as they were pressing them, darkness was coming on the field. Jackson wanted to cut them off from the United States, as he said, because he considered Virginia another country. He wanted to cut them off. He wanted this huge moral and military victory, at least in the South's mind. And right there is where you are here. And that's exactly what happened. They outflanked the Union. They rolled the dice, and they won. And the Union was on the run. In the night of May 2nd, very rarely did they have any battles at night. And they were looking to press the Union even further, and that's why Jackson was out there. And that's why he was shot by his own men, as they call today, friendly fire. The Six-Day Battle of Chancellorsville left behind a human wreckage unmatched in Virginia to that time. Lee won an unlikely victory but lost Stonewall Jackson. The Union Army under Joseph Hooker retreated in a gloomy rain, but soon be ready to fight again at Gettysburg. So the loss of Jackson, I personally believe, was the turning point of the war. There, it would look like the South was going to lose anyway, but once Jackson fell, it was guaranteed they were going to lose. So anyway, I want to show you some of the highlights when I was on my trip. Before I get into this, looking for freedom in America, I wanted to talk about some of the historic things here, like Chancellorsville Battlefield. And I also have another video coming out on the museum in Crossville, Tennessee, the military museum, which was very, very cool. A lot of really cool artifacts from basically the Civil War all the way through the Middle East conflicts. And they have a real Confederate flag in the museum up on the wall. Now, the stars and bars, as they call them, as people know, the big X, that is not the Confederate flag. The real Confederate flag was very much like the United States flag, with a blue upper left-hand corner, a blue square, and red and white stripes, but the stripes were a lot thicker. The reason why they changed them, because at the beginning of the war, from a distance, it looked like you were marching towards you thought was your friendly side. And then when they opened fire on you and they were devastating your line, you realized it was the enemy. So what they did was they changed to the battle flag only of the X, what they call the stars and bars. So the original, the real Confederate flag was not the ones that everybody screams about, racist, 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 racist. It's not at all. Anyway, I wanted to show you that. And it was a very, very cool place. Oddly enough, I'm from upstate New York, and I was talking to 2 or 3 of the younger guys inside the visitor center, some of the guides. And I'm from Binghamton, which is just below Syracuse, for those of you who don't know where it is, right above the Pennsylvania border. And one of the young men there said, "Oh, Binghamton, I know that." Not many people know that's the hometown of Rod Serling from the Twilight Zone. But anyway, I got family all over there. And then he named all the Enwell and Endicott and Johnson City and Binghamton and all the stuff in that county. And I went, "Are you kidding me? I'm all the way out here in Chancellorsville Battlefield, and here's a kid from my hometown." So I thought that was pretty interesting. So there's I did a lot of looking around, but it's got this little bit of video to show you. It was a very cool place. It was kind of surreal standing there. Is Jackson's monument to where he fell, and right next to it was a small granite stone in the ground for an unknown Union soldier. You notice it said U.S. Army. It didn't say Union. And I think it's right that they put him there as well. Whoever he was, somebody's son, somebody's husband, somebody's friend, somebody's boyfriend, somebody's cousin that never came back. And they have no clue who he is, and I'm sure there were a lot of unknown soldier deaths in the Civil War on both sides. And you ask any family, whether it has a family member or a close friend in war, when you don't know what happened to them and they never come back, you know they're dead, but you don't have closure. So I knelt and said a prayer in honor of that dead soldier, and I thought it was fitting. But it was very surreal being there because it was funny. As I was looking at the unknown Union soldier gravestone, there's a street right behind the trees there, and it was very, very, very loud. There's a lot of cars coming by. It's a busy place out there. And the weird part is I didn't hear him anymore. As I was concentrating on looking at the stone and thinking about that poor guy who, I think Lincoln quoted the phrase, the last full measure of devotion to his country. And that's, of course, his death. And I was just concentrating on that, and it was really weird. It's like I stopped hearing, and it was an interesting experience. And that's something that I think we're missing. We're missing heroes. We do have some, but not like the old days. Heroes to me are men that fought like this and died to keep the Union together. And for the Confederates, they fought for their independence. You can't go against their motives. Some of them were slaveholders, and yes, some were racist. But overall, they were fighting for their state, which they considered their country. And they gave the last full measure of devotion. Jackson did, as well as that Union soldier. And they shouldn't be forgotten. And the history of it and the interesting things about it should not be twisted and turned by progressives and leftists. History is what it is. Some good, some bad, and a whole lot of gray in the middle. It's not so black and white. So there's my little bit of video from Chancellorsville. One of the greatest battles, one of the greatest victories won by Robert E. Lee that ended the death of Stonewall Jackson, which I personally believe changed the course of not just U.S. history, but world history. And until next time, folks, goodbye and good luck.